Welcome to the show. Huge things to get through tonight, particularly the murders at Bondi Junction. Why we needed to find some heroes in this tragedy. You'll also hear from the murderer's parents. They're devastated. And the killer, he's mentally ill. Can't we force a schizophrenic like this, already known to police, to take his medication? But let's get straight to the trial of the decade, the verdict in the latest Brittany Higgins case, and a new crisis for the Albanese government. Justice Michael Lee today finally put an end to the years of to and fro, accusation and denial.
Mr. Lerman raped Miss Higgins.
And there you have it. Bruce Lerman raped Brittany Higgins on the balance of probabilities. Yes, the judge said Brittany Higgins had indeed told lies and had passionately kissed fellow Liberal staffer Bruce Lerman in a pub that night before going back with him after midnight to their Parliament House office. And she probably did not say no to having sex there, but Lerman was an even more chaotic liar and probably raped her, or did, on the balance of probabilities, because Higgins was too drunk to consent.
In his pursuit of gratification, he did not care one way or the other whether Miss Higgins understood or agreed to what was going on.
Now, this is some vindication for Brittany Higgins, but a colossal own goal by Bruce Lerman. It's catastrophic. He had a criminal trial for rape, called off because of juror misconduct, but then he's actually launched this civil trial himself, suing Channel 10 and presenter Lisa Wilkinson for defaming him, identifying him as a rapist in a broadcast, and in Wilkinson's speech, essentially after getting a Logie Award for an interview with Higgins. Here's how Justice Lee summed up Lerman's amazing mistake.
Having escaped the lion's den, Mr. Lerman made the mistake of coming back for his hat.
And all that left Lerman to walk the walk of shame outside the court after the judgment.
Bruce, do you stand by your version of events? Do you stand by your version of events, Mr. Lerman?
You made a mistake, Mr. Lerman, making that action.
Come on, Bruce, you've got to say something.
Terrible mistake.
Was it worth it?
Bruce Lerman is now ruined. The judge said even if he had won, he'd have got just $20,000, really a pittance in these sorts of cases. But now his reputation is totally shattered. He faces millions of dollars now of legal costs. An award hasn't yet been made. He could even be charged with releasing confidential police information. And his hopes of being a lawyer now seem finished. Here's why the judge found as he did. He said CCTV footage of that night of the rape showed Higgins drinking 11 glasses of alcohol at a pub with colleagues, including Lerman, who helped even lift her up when she was so drunk she fell over. The two of them kissed passionately, touched each other there, and then took an Uber back to Parliament House, where they worked at the office of the Liberal Defence Minister Linda Reynolds. Well, they didn't work that night. The judge said the evidence suggested Lerman had told Higgins they could drink whiskey there. He had kept whiskey in his desk. It was also the private place that they could get intimate, because Lerman's girlfriend was waiting for him at home. In fact, while they were at Parliament House, sent him 6 messages. Where are you? Lerman had just lied, according to the judge, when he claimed he went back to Parliament House to pick up his keys or do some work. The story's changed.
Common sense suggests that it is obvious there was one dominant thought running through the mind of Mr. Lerman as he was approaching Parliament House, and it had nothing to do with French submarine contracts.
Yes, the judge said Lerman was actually hell-bent on sex and indifferent to consent from Higgins, who he said must have been passive during the act, being so drunk, and then fell asleep immediately afterwards. The judge called Lerman a rapist and a cad and a liar and a walty-mitty figure who'd acted dishonourably. But Channel 10 and Lisa Wilkinson also had their reputations shredded. Justice Lee said Wilkinson was another unreliable witness in this case, one he couldn't trust, trying to deny responsibility for the report she got a Logie for. We'll talk more about her later in the show. The judge accused Channel 10 essentially of bad journalism, especially by not checking Higgins' dodgy claims that the Morrison Liberal government had covered up her rape and that Minister Reynolds' Chief of Staff, Fiona Brown, had treated her badly as part of that cover-up. The judge denied that. For one, he said he didn't believe Higgins when she claimed that she'd told Fiona Brown she'd been raped. No, she hadn't. And yet Brown had taken her on her own initiative to police herself and had also stuck up for Higgins' right not to make any formal complaint when Higgins didn't want to at that time, but was under pressure from her minister to do it. Higgins had also claimed she'd been frozen out by the Liberals after complaining, but the judge said she was actually offered 3 more jobs. So the judge was clear. Fiona Brown had treated Higgins seriously.
She was not someone to speculate or jump to conclusions, and I reject any suggestion Miss Higgins expressly said to Miss Brown at either their first or second meeting that she had been raped or sexually assaulted.
Yet Lisa Wilkinson today, who pushed this cover-up conspiracy theory, was treating the verdict as a vindication.
Today, the federal court has found that I published a true story.
She didn't take any questions before hobbling off. Now, claiming there'd been a Liberal cover-up made Brittany Higgins a hero, and not just to Wilkinson, but to the whole wider left and to the Labor Party, which used that claim to smash the Morrison government. Here's the judge on that particular frenzy.
Others say they believe all women surrendering their critical faculties by embracing and acting upon a slogan arising out of the Me Too movement. Some have predetermined views as to the existence or otherwise of a conspiracy to suppress a rape for political purposes. For more than a few, this dispute has become a proxy for broader cultural and political conflicts.
So why did those comments and a couple of others on that topic from the judge put a bomb under the Albanese government? That's because this government 2 years ago gave Brittany Higgins $2.4 million to compensate her for allegedly being treated badly by the Liberals. That massive handout was given after just 1 day of mediation, with Minister Reynolds and Higgins' other Liberal boss, Minister Michaelia Cash, essentially banned from coming along and saying that Higgins' claims were false. They weren't allowed to give their side of the story. The money just handed over. Now, the judge has essentially ruled that those Higgins' claims were indeed false.
When examined properly and without partiality, the cover-up allegation was objectively short on facts but long on speculation and internal inconsistencies.
So, now it's up to the Albanese government to explain why did it hand over those millions to Higgins for bad treatment that the judge couldn't find? Was that a political deal? But for Brittany Higgins today, that will not be the issue on her mind. For all the judge's criticisms today, her rape claim has now been vindicated at last. Sure, not by a criminal court, not to beyond all reasonable doubt, but this court has said yes, and even better for Higgins, she's won in the court of public opinion. Joining me now is leading defamation barrister Adrian Anderson, who once fought the good fight for me. Adrian, thanks for coming. Look, Bruce Lehrmann, seems to me he got very arrogant, decided he was going to go for the money, even though he's escaped this criminal trial that got called off. The moral of this verdict today, now that it's actually destroyed.
Yeah, well, he joins a long list of defamation plaintiffs like Oscar Wilde, the highwayman who got hung or hanged, Ben Robert-Smith, potentially. That if you've got related criminal proceedings, you want to be very, very careful about bringing defamation proceedings.
Oh, but this is just devastating. What now for Lehrmann and the law? Because among other things, the judge said that Lehrmann lied and actually had given documents to Channel 7 that he shouldn't have, that would form part of police documentation for his first trial.
Yeah, well, his credibility's in tatters, to start with. He did was found to have lied about giving the documents to Seven, which is a potential contempt of court. And he's facing another case in Queensland, and the police might have a fresh look at this case.
An unrelated case involving the allegation of rape, which he denies.
Yeah, and there may also be an appeal, of course, Andrew, as well.
God, I think he's probably well and truly singed, but we shall see. And then there's a matter of costs. This, if you lose, you're really up for the other side's costs as well, the legal costs. What are we talking about here?
Normally, millions. There's a hell of a lot of costs in a case like this, potentially, a range of 10 million. And but the judge made it clear today that he wasn't particularly happy with both sides. So he wasn't happy with the Logie speech. He wasn't happy. He didn't uphold the defence that Ten ran and Wilkinson ran to say they were reasonable.
Because essentially shoddy journalism, he was suggesting.
Yeah, and he found that the allegation of a cover-up really was unfounded. They were too willing to just believe what Higgins had to say and not question it properly. So the judge has sort of left open the possibility with costs that it might not just be as simple as the winner taking the spoils.
Now, on those two things where he did actually go for Channel 10 and he did call out Higgins as not truthful, they're the political dimension that most interested me. They go to the claim that there was a cover-up by this wicked Morrison government covering up a criminal offence, which is a crime in itself, and he said it was not true, that that actually treated Higgins' rape claim seriously, or the Chief of Staff of her boss did, and went above and beyond. Where does that leave the government in terms of the payout that it gave Brittany Higgins, $2.4 million, for alleged bad treatment that the judge didn't find?
Well, they should be revisiting that. It's simple as that.
They being?
The Commonwealth, as to say whether there's been a breach of this agreement, pursuant to which they agreed to pay that amount of money, have a close look at the judgment. What the judge said was false in that agreement.
But he's saying there that if it turns out that she didn't tell the truth about the facts on which, or the alleged facts on which the Albanese government gave the payout, that it can be null and void.
Absolutely. That's a possibility. It depends on construction of the agreement. But if you induce or you make representations which result in you receiving a significant payout, and those representations are false, then it may be able to be revisited. Yep.
But that would depend on the government actually wanting to do that, and I suspect it will not. The other legal factor here is that the judge was very clear that the program, Lisa Wilkinson's program, based on Brittany Higgins' allegations, made very serious allegations against the Chief of Staff of then Defence Minister Linda Reynolds, suggesting that she had not acted properly, that she had ignored that a claim of Brittany Higgins that she'd been raped, all of which the judge said was not true, that she'd actually acted very well. Now, I understand the statute of limitations of Fiona Brown being able to sue for defamation herself for those claims that this judge has found were not true has run out. Does that end the matter?
Not necessarily. The court has a power to extend a limitation period in exceptional circumstances. They'd want to know what the explanation was for the delay. It may well be that someone like that was entitled to reasonably await the outcome of this proceeding. That might be a reason for obtaining an extension. I've got no idea whether Ms Brown would want to pursue an action, but you can obtain an extension in appropriate circumstances. And the judge was, as you said, very glowing in terms of her evidence and his view of her account of things.
So it may not be finished here, because we've got then the settlement, $2.4 million. The government can't now explain. The judge has said, essentially, or indicated, it's based on false assumptions. Plus the Fiona Brown issue. She was defamed, in my opinion, and the judge has given her a glowing reference. This could go on and on. Plus, of course, there's Linda Reynolds herself suing for defamation
Yes, or an appeal. And I should be clear with Fiona Brown, things that are said in court as part of the court proceeding, you can't take action over. It's more those out of what was said out of court, particularly if it was said things were said knowing them to be false, which is known in defamation circles as malice.
So if people are thinking that's the end of the matter, oh no, it isn't. This has just been a total, what did he say? Omnishambles.
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 Or a train wreck. Yeah.
No one is left standing with reputation intact apart from Fiona Brown. Adrian Anderson, thank you so much indeed for your time.
My pleasure, Andrew.
After the break, we'll look again at this money that the Albanese government handed over to Ms Higgins. That just stinks. Plus, a new poll, 2 new polls. The government is sinking again.
Thanks, Franco. Listen, what's happening with coffee prices?
Inflation. Where do you think it's going to go down?
Ross also.
Franco, I'm so sorry. You're going to have to watch the show. Oh, hey, Ross.
Now, this Brittany Higgins rape allegation, the decision today, could really reopen a whole old scandal. Like I said, this judgment raises serious questions about the Albanese government's $2.4 million payout to Brittany Higgins to compensate her for allegedly being treated badly by the Liberals in an attempted cover-up. The judge has now essentially ruled that Higgins' claims of that cover-up were false. Here are part of his comments again today.
When examined properly and without partiality, the cover-up allegation was objectively short on facts but long on speculation and internal inconsistencies.
Joining me now, former Labor Senator Stephen Conroy, former Cabinet Minister as well, and former Victorian Liberal Party President Michael Kroger. Michael, that payment now stinks even higher. It was bad before, where the Albanese government threw so much money at this woman after one day of negotiations and banned her former bosses from coming in to defend themselves. Now the judge said, what cover-up?
It seemed very odd, didn't it? And she got 1.5 million of that 2.4 because for lost future earnings that she'd never be able to work again. I think if you've written, she had 4 or 5ve jobs.
Well, a couple of jobs,
yeah.
Internships as well, but yeah.
And so they were serious positions. They're not,
contract.
Can you say that she'd be unfit for work the rest of her life? I doubt it. I mean, the whole payment smells because they wouldn't allow the ministers involved to give their side of the story. What kind of compensation payment is ever given in these circumstances where the other side, in this case the Commonwealth, are prevented from giving their defence? The whole thing stinks to high heaven, and thank goodness it's being looked at.
Stephen, can I explain that payout by the Albanese government soon after it came into office? It had exploited this idea of a cover-up, of the Liberals being mean to women, not believing them, trying to hide this allegation, all of which the judge says not true. They'd exploited it, used as a smash for Scott Morrison. They couldn't come in and then not give the payout, which would give the assumption that they never even believed these allegations in the first place.
Well, first, I don't accept your premise of that. There's plenty of times where oppositions have had one position in opposition and then come into government and find a different set of facts and have not made.
I'll come up with a better explanation.
But I really think you're stretching here on the basis of a very, very cogent and reasoned argument today, which I think we all watched. A judge found this poor woman was raped. And she was raped in Parliament House. There is a duty of care inside the building. And I don't think, I can't accept your premise that this is all, she only got the payout on the basis of the cover-up. I just don't accept that.
No, it was on the basis of a treatment by the Liberals, not on whether she was raped or not.
The government.
That was not part of this.
The government, okay? The responsible entity in the building is the Joint House Departments, and the government provides duty of care. Mm-hmm. And clearly that had some factor. Now, I don't know whether the cover-up was 80% of the judgment, reason behind that judgment. Neither do you. And you shouldn't be asserting it and ignoring the fact that a terrible thing has happened.
Stephen, she only got $400,000 of the $2.4 million for compensation for the alleged conduct. Now, of course, if that was discussed now, it'd be different. But it just seems to me the Commonwealth seemed to be in an awful hurry to pay this money. By the way, it's not a criticism of Higgins. I mean, her legal people put together a case and said, hey, give us, I think they wanted $2.5 million for lost earnings. That's what her lawyers do. Give me this amount of money. the Commonwealth seemed to be in a hell of a hurry to pay her a lot of money very quickly without hearing from the other side. That's why most people think it's extremely odd. Quite Michael,
you're criticising
very odd.
You're criticising a conspiracy by creating another one. It's okay.
I don't know about that. I think we're exposing a conspiracy. Bondi Junction shootings, absolutely shocking. So many dead and injured. I mean, the poor people, you know. And we hear people say, well, look, we've got to do something, anything to save us from this sort of thing again, when really can we? I mean, it seemed to be too random. I hear even suggestions now that security guards be armed in shopping centres, or maybe pepper spray, maybe batons, maybe even sidearms. Is that really the answer?
Look, that is always... I've been overseas to countries where you walk up to any shopping centre and there's armed guards at the entrance. There's metal detectors. Each shop has their own armed guard at the front of it. I would hope, despite this extraordinary tragedy, that we don't need to get that far. I mean, the person involved was mentally disturbed. I think that is fairly clear and evident. I don't think that... I would hope we don't need to go down that path. I would hope that's not where this debate goes.
And look, it was a stabbing, right? The guy comes at a knife. I mean, pepper spray. Who's got... What, you've got to walk right up to a guy with a pepper spray?
It's better than nothing, Andrew. I mean, you can have metal...
It's better than nothing, but how many of these events do we have?
Can you stop someone doing this, is the question. Now, you can have pepper sprays. It's better than nothing, because if you have a metal detector at the front, OK, that stops someone coming in with a knife or a gun, but it doesn't mean they can't steal a knife from a shop in the shopping centre and then walk around doing their work.
This is the thing, I think. You know, people are struggling for some... Please, what can we do to save ourselves? It may be one of those things. This is a tragic part of life at the moment.
Yeah.
Bad stuff can happen when you have no reason to suspect it might. So, and I think that's really freaking a lot of people out. We'll have more about this later in the show. Just quickly, Stephen, on politics, a new poll from the Australian Financial Review showing that Albanese has once again lost the lead. It's 50-50 on after preferences. But when you look at the first vote of people, the primary vote, Labor's just got 31% of the Liberals 40%.
Look, that's...
And by the way, the Roy Morgan says Labor is behind now.
Yeah. So look, I think the polls are settled for the first 4 months of the year that Labor's primary is down in the low 30s and the Liberals are somewhere between 37 and 40. Look, Labor would have to be concerned with that. Labor would obviously want to see, by definition, a higher primary vote and would hope that they can pull that back off the Liberal Party. But the problem, again, with these national polls is they don't reflect what's happening on the ground in individual seats. And
the Labor Party has run some very effective marketing.
Any suggestion that Labor would lose, minority government would certainly seem to be the case if the poll was held this weekend.
I'm out of time. Just give me 3 reasons off the top of your head why that poll is bad for Labor.
Oh, it's a poor government. They're extremist on foreign policy issues that we've discussed on this show. I don't think the Treasurer is very good. He's no Keating, he's no Costello. I think he's a plotter who presents well. Government spending's out of control. Migration issues are worrying people.
I don't know the spending out of control is bothering voters, but...
they worry about budget deficits at a time when... Because of the high iron ore prices and high employment levels, we should have a massive budget surplus. And, this bloke's been hit in the backside by a rainbow, as they say.
Obviously, whatever Albanese's been trying since the break, apart from the
not working.
Cuts,
not working.
Michael Kroger, Steve Conroy, thank you very much to you both. After the break, Iran attacks Israel with more than 300 missiles and drones. And here's our Prime Minister saying, don't respond. But just 2 of them land and kill nobody. Is this World War III or World War theatre? Plus, the parents of the Bondi Junction mass murder speak. It's just, we're going to talk about whether mentally ill is an excuse for top forensic psychologist after this. More than a dozen anti-Israel protesters were arrested in Melbourne today, demanding Israel stop fighting. which is rather tricky since Israel on the weekend was attacked by Iran, which fired more than 300 missiles and drones at Israel in its first ever direct attack on that country. Now, Iran up to now has paid other terrorist groups to attack Israel instead, proxy groups, Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen. But it felt that honour this time demanded it attack Israel itself after Israel a few weeks ago assassinated a top Iranian general in Syria. In fact, a guy directing some of these terror attacks on Israel, including, says an Iranian group close to the supreme leader of Iran, the October 7 massacre of 1,200 Jews. No wonder Israel wanted him punished. Naturally, the Prime Minister, our Prime Minister, is now, even now, demanding that Israel not hit back.
We want to see caution exercise.
But should Israel actually hit back? I mean, it sounds so serious, 300 missiles and drones at your own country. What, are you going to just sit there and take it? How would we react to an attack like that from, I don't know, Indonesia or whatever? But Iran made sure it was actually more for show. It warned it would attack, plenty of warning. America knew when it would attack. Israel and the US and Britain all got ready. The British sent jets. Even the Jordanians and Saudi Arabians, Arab countries, helped Israel to defend itself. And Iran fired only at military targets. Its drones took hours to get to Israel. By the time it got there, everything was shot down, except for 2 missiles, which caused only minor damage to an airfield out in the desert. No one at all killed. Joining me is the country's top foreign affairs writer, Greg Sheridan, of the Australian newspaper. Greg, Iran only fired a few of its, relatively few, of its massive amounts of armaments. Hezbollah on the Lebanese border could have fired 100,000 rockets and overwhelmed the Israeli defence. None of that happened. Was this a real war or just for show?
So it's a bit of a mixture, Andrew, very complex. So I think it wanted to hit some Israeli targets. I think they fired more than 100 ballistic missiles. A couple of those got through. Yeah, a couple of those got through and hit an Israeli airbase, but luckily didn't do any damage. I think the Iranians are deeply embarrassed at how incompetent their strike was. They certainly calibrated this strike. As you say, they gave everyone notice. They expected that most of the missiles would be stopped. But I'm sure they thought that some more would get through than did get through. I think they needed to show their militia groups that they themselves, the Iranians, was prepared to put some skin in the game. Also, their US deterrence of them failed. Their deterrence of the US worked. So they attacked Israel, whether, with full venomous intent or not. And Biden's reaction is to tell Israel, don't respond, don't respond.
He said, you've got to win, bank it.
Yeah. Biden told Iran not to attack Israel, and they attacked. So Iranian deterrence worked, American deterrence didn't work.
Very good point.
So there are some pluses and some minuses. I think Israel will strike back against Iran in due course, but they're going to let Iran stew in the technical failures that it racked up for a while. They're going to let everybody in the region look at that. A new demonstration.
Right, I'm very much struck by this. If you were right, and it wasn't just a Potemkin attack, it was for real, or semi-real, like I said, warnings and all that kind of thing, but that might explain for a start why Iranian television ran footage allegedly said, look what we've done, fire in the sky, things burning. It was actually a Chilean thing from Chile.
Right.
Footage that they'd pinched. What they've actually announced is how helpless they are and how good Israel's defences are.
Absolutely. So it's still very unclear, because if they ever decide to make the full strategic strike, they'll send a lot more missiles all at once, and they'll get Hezbollah, the Houthis, the militias in Syria and Iraq to fire all at once too. But I think what you're seeing, so the Saudis and the Jordanians both actively helped Israel. So what you're seeing, the Middle East has a natural system of 2 alliances, the Sunni Gulf states minus Qatar, plus Israel, plus the United States, against Iran's Shiite circle of terror, which also embraces some Sunnis like Hamas. And what has stopped that from functioning well for Israel and the West is this dopey, idiotic policy that the Biden administration inherited from Barack Obama of trying to woo Iran into cooperation. So Donald Trump, and I'm not shy of criticising Donald Trump had a much more intelligent and effective policy. Isolate and contain Iran and reassure the Gulf Arabs. America only has to do that. It wouldn't cost it $1 more than it's spending now, and it's got everything it wants in the Middle East.
I think that's absolutely correct, and I think people should recognise the protesters here seem to think that Israel's a pariah. What does it tell them that even after this Gaza war, you've got two Arab countries, Muslim countries, including Saudi Arabia, which are actively helping Israel beat Iran, because obviously they fear Iran more than they fear Israel.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Andrew. And not only that, the four Muslim nations, regional nations, Arab and North African nations, which made peace agreements and exchanged diplomatic relations with Israel under Trump, not one of them has broken diplomatic relations as a result of the Gaza war. The Gulf Arabs really have no investment in the Palestinian cause, and they certainly have no investment in Hamas, which is part of the Muslim Brotherhood and is directed by Iran. But there will come a lot of moments of truth quite soon. I think the Israelis will strike back at Iran. That's just my guess. I don't have any intel on this. I think they'll take their time. They'll let Iran stew in the juice of its technical failure. I don't think they'll hit the nuclear facilities, but I think they'll hit military facilities with missiles. It'll be deadly. It'll be quite different from this strike. And then Iran will face the conundrum, what it does then.
Yes, and don't forget, Israel's got a huge vested interest in stopping Iran from taking that last step and getting itself a nuclear weapon, because that could be a game changer. Greg Sheridan, thank you so much indeed for your time.
Thanks, Andrew.
The parents of the Bondi Junction killer, they've spoken out. Now, I might upset some of you by saying this, but in some ways, they also are victims of this horror that we've seen. Because on Saturday, their son, 40-year-old Joel Cauchi, went to the Bondi Junction shopping centre in Sydney, stabbed to death 6 people, 5 of them women, including the mum of a 9-month-old baby, also stabbed. It was like Cauchi, in fact, was out to hunt women, especially. The dead, though, also included a male security guard, a refugee from Pakistan, ironically came to Australia for his safety. And the latest victim to be named is a student from China, all alone in this country, trying to make her future. I mean, the whole thing is just so horrific. And the rampage ended only when a heroic police inspector, Amy Scott, ran to the danger and shot Cauchi dead. It was also random, as I was saying before. That makes it so frightening. But police do say Cauchi had a mental illness, schizophrenia. There were reports that he wasn't taking his medication. And to make it worse, police believe he was also a user of ice. Now, the parents were in agony knowing their son had been killed, but he'd also killed others. They know he had acted like a monster, but they also know he was ill.
This is a parent's absolute nightmare when they have a child with mental illness, that something like this would happen. And my heart goes out to the people our son has hurt. If he was in his right mind, he would be absolutely devastated at what he has done. But he obviously was not in his right mind. He somehow had been triggered into a psychosis and he'd lost touch with reality. And it's not a joke. It's not a joke. It's difficult for all those poor people that have lost their loved ones.
Do you have any reason to understand why he would have targeted women?
Yes.
Why?
Because he wanted a girlfriend. And he's got no social skills, and he was frustrated out of his brain. I'm sorry, but there's nothing I can do or say that can bring it back to dead.
Okay.
Anthony, no one's blaming you, just so you know.
I know that, but I mean,
you know all the
he's my son.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, he's my son, and I'm loving a monster. To you, he's a monster. To me, he was a very sick boy. Believe me, he was a very sick boy.
We're all now looking for something, anything to make sense of this horror, or to at least learn something that we think, well, if something's come out of this, some way of making us safer. That's why, among other reasons, we're praising the heroes like Inspector Scott or that French labourer who helped ward off Cauchi with just the bollard. How gutsy is that? But is this mental illness angle something we should look at? The New South Wales Premier today thought so.
The coronial investigation that will take place is likely to look at mental health support as well as the cooperation between states. And when people move between jurisdictions, when they come from one state to another, we need to make sure that there's systems in place to track that movement, to make sure that we're in a situation where we can collect information that's important and necessary.
Joining me is Australia's best-known criminal psychologist, Tim Watson-Munro. Tim Watson-Munro, thank you so much for your time. Some people are going to say, look, you know, playing the mental health card, it's too easy. We have in Australia more than 100,000 people with schizophrenia. They certainly don't all go around stabbing people. But do you see a potential link here?
Well, I think potential there is. There was an interesting study published in the Sydney Morning Herald today, Andrew, by Professor Olaf Nielsen. He's a eminent psychiatrist in Sydney, and he looked at international studies that suggested that really this stranger homicide, as it's described by psychotic people, is 1 in 14 million people, or 2 people every couple of years in New South Wales. The disturbing thing out of that is not so much that number, it's not that significant, but 20% of those people, that is 1 in 5, were homeless, and 1 in 8 of those people were not complying with their medication. So I think the connection is having a psychotic illness, people not being adequately cared for in the community, and I have spoken about this at some length over the last few days. We have a housing crisis in Australia. It's hard enough for people with jobs to obtain accommodation these days in capital cities like Sydney and Melbourne. It's impossible for people who are vulnerable, who suffer a mental illness, to get a home. And in this tragic case, we don't know if he was psychotic at the time. We don't know much about his symptoms at the time. He's dead. But clearly he had a diagnosed mental illness, and he had those 2 other stress factors that I've mentioned, which is homelessness. I understand he was living rough out of his car. It's highly likely that he wasn't getting adequate treatment or getting the medication that he requires.
Well, Tim, on that very point, right, as you say, reports he wasn't on his medication. Police had dealt with him a few times before. His own father said at times he was frightened for his own life with his son, took away knives and all that. Can we do more to force people like that have already shown some signs of, you know, trouble there, to keep taking their medication? Or is that a violation of their rights? You know, like some people were saying, oh, look, we shouldn't be forced to take the COVID vaccine. Can we force people to take schizophrenic medicine when they've exhibited some sorts of signs of threat or trouble?
Well, there are provisions in the law and the Mental Health Act for people to be scheduled or sectioned. If they're floridly symptomatic, they can be put into a psychiatric hospital and be properly treated. But I think the point you're making, Andrew, is that often it's more nuanced than that. It's more subtle. People may be taking their medication and then for various reasons they feel that they're improving. With the effluxion of time, they become less compliant and more symptomatic, and they can fall through the cracks. So it's a very complex issue. Of course, the human rights issue is an important one, but so are the rights of people in the community to feel safe. But as I've said, stranger homicide amongst schizophrenics is very rare.
And maybe that's ultimately the unfortunate conclusion, isn't it, Tim, that it's so rare there is not really much we could wisely do except watch out and hope we give more care. These people more in our sight lines, not living in cars. I don't know. Tim Watson-Munro, thank you so much indeed for your time. Really appreciate it. It's not easy. It's just not easy. You wonder sometimes about deinstitutionalisation, whether, you know, we've got now a lot of people out of sight, out of mind. We think, they're not an institution, we've done the right thing. But meanwhile, they're in a private hell that sometimes erupts on the rest of us. I don't know. After the break, it's been a shocking day, or two, for our TV stations. We got too close to the Higgins case, but Channel 7 on Saturday suffered even more embarrassment and that could cost them a fortune. It's been a shocking day for the media, particularly for the two TV stations that got exclusive interviews with the two main characters in the Higgins case. First, Channel 7, which was accused in court of paying for prostitutes and drugs for Bruce Lehrmann to get him to agree to its interview on the Spotlight show. 7 denies doing that, but today said goodbye to its second producer from that show, executive producer Mark Llewellyn. But Lisa Wilkinson, Channel 10, who I showed you earlier, claiming victory outside court, was actually slammed by the judge today for damage done by her speech at the Logies just 8 days before Lehrmann's planned criminal trial for rape, where she praised Higgins and caused the trial to be postponed because it was prejudicial to the administration of justice. Wilkinson blamed bad legal advice from a lawyer of Channel 10, but Justice Lee wasn't buying it.
If she had thought matters through as an experienced journalist and less as a champion for Miss Higgins, she ought to have known the speech was fraught with danger and recognised that lauding a complainant on the evening of a rape trial in the terms she did would be apt to undermine the due administration of justice.
Not only that, Justice Lee also didn't buy Wilkinson dodging responsibility again, this time for her interview with Higgins, where she was spreading this cover-up theory. You know, the Morrison government covered up a rape and not checking the holes in the story, blaming instead of producers and claiming she just read the script.
This picture is hard to reconcile with Ms Wilkinson getting up on the night of the Logies, accepting a prestigious award on behalf of the project and declaiming, "This interview and story is by far the most important work I have ever done."
Joining me now, Daniel Wild, Deputy Executive Director of the Institute of Public Affairs, and Stephen Trevura, Senior Lecturer in History at Campion College and author of The Forgotten Menzies. Stephen, what do you make of what this has done to the media? We haven't got Stephen there yet. In that case, we'll go to you, Daniel.
Well, it's been a serious problem, Andrew, as you pointed out. I think Justice Lee has done a great service to the community in his very erudite, dispassionate assessment of what happened. Nobody has come out of this looking better than what they went in. Almost every single media organisation involved was pursuing eyeballs for advertising revenue, politicians seeking political advantage. The individuals involved themselves were castigated as being unreliable witnesses, and I think Australians are just hoping that we can draw a line under what has been a very sordid affair.
Unfortunately, we can't draw a line. Breaking news, and this is what I feared yesterday. Maybe I'm wrong. Copycat killing? I do not know. Breaking, 2 people have been stabbed at a church in Fairfield, also in Sydney. Now, these are initial reports only, right? News might change. Police are responding. A large crowd was in attendance. We've got no details on any injuries or who could be responsible. We just don't know. 2 people stabbed at a church in Sydney's southwest. We'll have more details as soon as we can bring them. But Stephen Trevura, I mean, you know, we seem in such a terrible state at the moment. People are just feeling we're being torn apart, nowhere is safe. It's not just this. It's a general feeling. It's really tapped into a great unease with this. And when you've got the partisan media using the whole case as a football for one side or the other side, mate, we're in a state right now, aren't we?
We absolutely are, and as you said, as many have said, the media, certainly the mainstream media, and certainly in this instance, Channel 10, has gotten far too close to the Labor Party. I mean, Channel 10 were back to basically acting like they were on the Labor Party payroll, and Michael, Justice Lee's analysis of Channel 10's and Lisa Wilkinson's behaviour was absolutely damning. I mean, you've got to remember that interview that Miss Higgins did with Channel 10, that was less about the actual rape itself, and it was mainly about the alleged government cover-up. Justice Lee has found there was basically no evidence to suggest there was any kind of cover-up, and that raises all sorts of questions, one of which is obviously the $2.4 million that the Albanese government gave to Ms Higgins. That now really needs, an investigation needs to open up into that. But second, that Ms. Fiona Brown, a Liberal Chief of Staff at the time, who actually helped Ms. Higgins and then was subsequently accused by Ms. Higgins and by Channel 10 as being part of an attempted cover-up. Well, she lost her career over that. Her career was destroyed over that.
Absolutely. Not just that. She was in such a state, as Stephen, that she begged not to give evidence in this particular case. She felt so fragile. I mean, she's been traumatised by it. It's just disgraceful what Channel 10 did to her, believing Brittany Higgins. But to add to Channel 7's shame, Daniel, on Saturday it falsely claimed that the Bondi Junction killer was actually a man called Benjamin Cohen. Anti-Israel trolls on social media had matched his face to that of the killer. Found some vague look-alike, didn't ignore the fact the police said the killer was 40. Benjamin Cohen's a student, only 20 years old. The fake news was actually spread by a pro-Putin propagandist called Aussie Cossack, believe it or not, who's hiding from police in the Russian consulate in Sydney, plus an anti-Israel extremist called Syrian Girl in Perth. And Channel 7 fell for it on a social media post and even on Breakfast TV. Have a listen.
The attacker, 40-year-old Benjamin Cohen, dressed in a Kangaroos ARL jersey, said to be known to police, shot and killed by a brave female police officer.
The attacker, 40-year-old Benjamin Cohen, is known to police.
Daniel, how could you do that?
Well, the people expect the media to get the who, what, when, where right, and on this case, they didn't get it right. And I think it goes to what you wrote about today, Andrew, which is the community is really on tenterhooks about what is happening in our society. Many people feared that it was an act of ideological or religiously motivated violence. Now, we now know that that was not the case. It was the actions of a clearly disturbed, very, very mentally unwell individual. But what that means is it actually heightens the obligation on the media to make sure they get the basic facts right. And on this particular occasion, that just did not happen.
Well, Benjamin Cohen's contacted me, responded to me saying, you know, he's just shocked that people were maliciously, mindlessly spreading misinformation without even the slightest thought to fact-checking or what it was doing, could be doing to him. He's also posted the sort of video of himself, or someone did, of him talking about this. Here he is.
It's extremely disappointing to me to see people mindlessly propagating misinformation like this without even the slightest thought put into fact-checking. But what's even more disappointing to me is a major news network doing this, using my name, without waiting for a statement from the police to verify this, or going out to try verify it themselves. This whole incident has been highly distressing and disappointing for myself and my family.
And let me just repeat this breaking news, by the way, that we're chasing up. We'll have more details all through the night as soon as we get them. 2 people stabbed at a church in Fairfield in Sydney. As I say, initial reports only. Police responding, large crowd was there. We've got no details on injuries or who it is that did what, where, why and when, and we don't speculate, but we'll tell you more as soon as we can. But Stephen, I've only got 20 seconds. It seems to me that Benjamin's got a case for a lot of money.
Oh, absolutely. And it's just amazing to think that Channel 7 didn't even bother consulting with the police to see if this was true. And maybe there's something good about the old days when you got a daily newspaper and a 6:30 news, and that was it, because at least gave journalists time to actually, and a news organisation to do their time and check the facts.
Point. There's too much reward for being first rather than for being accurate. Stephen Chavura, Daniel Wild, thank you so much to you both. That's it from me. Up next, Sherry Markson. Good night.